Yes. Hello, good morning. Welcome, dear audience, to this live roundtable discussion on safe and sustainable products and materials, how to get there. We still miss one of our participants, Bjorn Hansen, who you've just seen. Yes, there he is. Very good. Bjorn, welcome as well. So, good morning, everybody. Good morning, dear audience. My name is Jack de Bruijn. I'm the Director for Prioritization and Integration in ECHA, and I have the pleasure to moderate this session, which will last for approximately 1 hour until 11:30 Helsinki time. In our panel, which you see on your screen, we have a very good selection of very experienced guests, which that will all for sure have a lot to say about this interesting topic. Let me introduce them very quickly. We have Cristina Ávila, Head of Unit Sustainable Chemicals in the Directorate-General for Environment, European Commission. Welcome, Cristina. We have Anne-Sofie Bäckar, Executive Director in ChemSec. Welcome, Anne-Sofie. Marco Mensink, Director-General in Cefic. Good morning, Marco. Susanne Zänker, Director-General of AISE, today representing the wider downstream users of Chemicals Coordination Group, DUCC. Welcome, Susanne, as well. And finally, Bjorn Hansen, which you have just also heard, of course, if you have been following this session online. So before diving into contents, dear audience, let me invite you to provide also comments in the chat. That's one possibility. And in particular, also ask you to provide further questions under the Q&A tab. And depending on whether we have enough time, we'll try to address some of these questions also during our discussions. So before giving the floor to our dear participants, a few words of introduction to the theme of today. As you know, the new chemical strategy for sustainability has production and use of safe and sustainable chemicals at its heart and proposes a clear roadmap and timeline for the transformation of the European industry. The Commission has indicated that it will itself develop EU safe and sustainable by design criteria for chemicals by the end of 2022, so end of next year, and this work is currently progressing. So for the sake of the panel discussion today, let's assume that by the end of next year, we will have clarity on these criteria. We will know what type of chemicals we want to see in 2050. And let's now assume that there's still a significant gap to bridge, which I think we all probably can agree to. What are then the options to get there? What tools, regulations, incentives, sticks perhaps, do we need to enable the EU industry as well as companies importing chemicals and products into Europe to only use those chemicals we want to see being used? This is the discussion our panel will focus on today. And I would like to start with a short round of reflections on this question from each of you. Starting with Cristina. What is the Commission's view? How are you going to tackle this transformation, Cristina? Please.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well.
Okay, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this panel to discuss this very interesting question. Well, I think in the Commission we have set the path that we would like to walk in the chemicals strategy for sustainability. So there we have defined this vision of how to get there. So it's not only the final objective of moving towards a toxic-free environment, but and the vision that we have that in the future, by 2030, we have in the strategy as a set deadline, we produce and use chemicals in a way that they contribute to society, but they avoid the harm to the people and the planet. So not only we set this vision, but we also set the path to get there with a number of regulatory and non-regulatory actions. So we are taking an approach with several components. So first of all, as you were mentioning yourself, Jack, we want to use regulatory tools to phase out the most harmful chemicals, especially for consumer products. And for that, we will, as I said, need to use the legislation that we have in place today and amend it as necessary. We hope that this will also create the interest to move into substitutes. Because in order to achieve it, we will need to have the substitutes in the market, new chemicals, new technologies, new products and materials that would be then safe and sustainable by design, that can act as the substitutes to these most harmful chemicals that we are no longer allowing in consumer products. So basically what we want to promote is a virtuous circle between prevention, protection, and innovation to catalyze a shift towards chemicals, materials, and products that are safe and sustainable by design. For this, as you said yourself, we are also developing the criteria for safe and sustainable by design. Your premise for this panel was we already have this criteria in place. So how do we get there? So apart from the regulatory approach for bans of certain uses, we have put forward more funding opportunities than ever before, not only under Horizon Europe and the Environment Program LIFE, but also under the EU Recovery and Resilience and Cohesion Funds. That are openings that can be explored and should be explored by companies and regions on how to promote the use of safe and sustainable chemicals. And finally, we also think that access to data and to knowledge is of extreme importance. When we are developing the new materials, we have committed to developing a common open data platform on chemicals to facilitate the sharing, the access, and the reuse of information on chemicals coming from all sources. So in conclusion, 3 tools to get there: tougher legislation, but also a lot of stimulation and development of safe and sustainable by design with funding opportunities, and also the encouragement to industries to engage in this process. And I think they are really interested in doing so, and also better access to knowledge on chemicals.
Thank you very much, Cristina. Very clear story. Let's move to Marco. Can I turn to you? And your companies will need to deal with this change. They will need to produce the right type of chemicals, let's call it that way. What do you think will help them in making this transition?
Thanks, Jack, and thanks, Cristina, for the intro. The way we see it, or the way I see it, and let's maybe start there, with the massive transformation the CSS will bring to us, combined with what we call the twin transition. It's not only chemical strategy, but also circular economy, plus digitalization, plus decarbonization by 2050. So you're looking at a massive and fundamental transformation of industry to come. You're almost at where 2 curves in your growth actually cross. You're right at that point where you need to come out of the old and go into the new, make still enough money in the old to transfer to the new, and change over your markets as well. And not only financially and in investment terms, but also in mindset and education, also in the skills in the workers, etc., but also in the relations with your customers. So really at that point, which we in Cefic named 2027, because 1927 were the Solvay conferences, and you all know the famous chemical pictures with Rutherford, Einstein, Curie, etc. You're pretty much at that point, because the parallels that at that stage a family put its entire fortune on a new chemistry and went into a future that later developed. Next to the regulatory agenda, which Cristina has described, I think what's crucial is that you make a difference in the approach to realize that for some companies this is going to be very challenging. For some other companies even more, meaning if you have 3-4 chemistries as a mid-sized company which you need to transform, that is existential in those companies. So definitely we need an agenda for the SMEs and for the smaller producers around Europe, not only just in chemicals, but also see, for example, the smaller paint companies or the smaller cosmetics and downstream user companies. Then you need indeed research programs where, and there is some clarity coming now from DG Comp, cooperation in industry needs to be redefined. A lot of this innovation will have to be done in partnerships between companies and downstream users. What's interesting to see is that Commissioner Vestager has brought out a policy brief with a new view on the Green Deal and competition policy. I'd like to add that. Then you need to see that we can create the markets. You will see when the regulatory action comes in that for a number of chemistries, we don't have alternatives today. And indeed, you're going to need long-range research programs. For some, we might have the alternatives, but they're not being taken up by the market, either because they're more expensive, either because there's alternatives abroad, and you'll need to create a situation where enforcement comes in much stronger, and we're discussing that in the high-level roundtable. But you might also want to look at the way to convince our downstream users and customers to actually buy the alternatives, which are de facto more expensive. That's not on the final product, but that's in the B2B relation, something which is really important. So in adding to the regulatory agenda, which Cristina named, and the funding for innovation, I think you need to look at the rules of and how companies can work together on these specific developments on substitution, which is core, how you combine it with the complete Green Deal transformation, with enforcement, and maybe monetizing the opportunities, making sure actually the markets start and the markets take up. And that's where I'd like to take it from today's Safe and Sustainable by Design, where, by the way, my team told me to invite you to the Cefic booth, which is about SSBD criteria later on. Thanks, team. But then translate Safe and Sustainable by Design from a theoretical concept into safe and sustainable by design. What is the next generation of chemicals in aviation, in automotive, in cosmetics, in detergents? And those programs will need to start to run, not only under Horizon, but also in industry and new types of cooperation. That's as an intro, Jack. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Marco. Very interesting contribution, addressing quite a few points, which I'm sure we'll come back later on. So let me turn to you, Susanne, and as you're representing the companies that typically, I would say, produce mixtures that are used directly by consumers or in industrial settings by other companies. How do you see this change happening? What helps your members in making the transition?
Thank you to ECHA. Thank you, Jack, for the introduction. Maybe first a word, what is DUCC standing for? So that's the Downstream Users of Chemicals Coordination Group, and 11 associations and sector groups are part of it. You see the logos behind me, and I invite you already to visit the booth, because there you can find each of the association sector more in detail. So in short, we are covering, as you were just saying, Jack, chemicals used in the formulations for professional, industrial, and consumer use. So covering detergents, paints, cosmetics, fragrances, aerosols, inks, toners, adhesives, sealants, disinfectants, press room chemicals, construction chemicals, lubricants, plant protection products, and chemical in the distribution industry. So this is what we are trying to cover and do since 20 years. And when earlier on it was mentioned we go up to 2050, we definitely want to be part of the game for the next 25 years, so up to 2025, and to be part in the collaboration of it. So this is for me the most critical part. Remain a partner, remain being able to provide the expertise on the downstream users. What is the place, what is important? It's not just the upstream suppliers, it's also the way the chemicals are being used, exposed, and in the whole discussion about, and I think was mentioned several times, tools, how to define the criteria and the tools. So we want to be part in the expertise advice, the guidance documents, provide the tools to all the members along the value chain, with the aim to secure the safe use of the chemicals. So this is the first thing. We support the objective of the Commission, and we want to be part of this transition period up to 25 or whenever is the goal. We have identified our priorities, but I won't go into detail right now, but it's everything related to mixtures, to be able to carry everyone along the line in discussing with you. We want the full life cycle be considered. The products are being used for and developed to have a longevity of life, so to be sustainable products. The supply chain is complex, so also the complexity of the whole supply chain from the supply until the waste, and it was also mentioned in the introductory speech already this morning. So the article service life. The call for us, what should be, are the principles. So 4 principles are very important. The use of science and risk-based approaches. So we're talking about risks and hazards. So it's absolutely important for the end users or downstream users that the exposure is being looked at as well, and not just a consumption counting of the hazardous chemicals, but also the way they're being used, what can be done, how can we contribute. We also, and that was mentioned several times, including in this Commission strategy, be part on the innovation. I think this is most important to remain an industry alive in Europe, to be competitive. We need a good and sound frame for allowing innovation to take place. We are not operating only in Europe, we are operating on a global basis. So for us, the global discussion and dialogue at UN is absolutely important. Even if there is the ambition to be the first in class with regard to chemicals, don't get detached from what's going on at UN level. Please be aligned, continue the dialogue. We are happy to participate. And the other point already mentioned, I don't know whether it was Cristina or Marco, is about digitalization. We have the products on the market. We are here to inform the end user, the consumer. So digitalization in terms of informing the consumer is absolutely important to move ahead. And I think I like very much when it was discussed or mentioned earlier on the tools. So we want to be part in the discussion of the criteria for the tools. We are aligned with the vision, but in the framework, it should not be too prescriptive. I think industry has a huge value in what we can do as well through voluntary initiatives by industry. We have a track record on it, be it AISE, FICA, IFRA, on sustain criteria for setting sustainable criteria for being the charter, be it for standards, be it for other parts. So don't be too prescriptive in the way of getting there. We want to be part in the criteria, but leave also room for innovation. So this is, I will stop here, and many thanks of being a part as a downstream user in the full development of the new strategy and criteria to allow innovation and competitiveness. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Susanne, for a very clear introduction as well. So we've heard the regulators and industry. Let me ask Anne-Sofie from ChemSec. I mean, your organization has been critically monitoring, I think, the implementation of current laws. And you also work a lot with industry at different levels in the supply chain. What are your views on the instruments that the EU should use?
Sorry. I mean, one of the goals of the chemical strategy is really to get that new chemicals and materials should be inherently safe by design. And I mean, a general safe and sustainable by design approach would help industries to improve their processes. But when we're talking about getting inherently safe material and products, we have to look at criteria that really are strict and that reduce the use of hazardous chemicals. And I think this is the interesting part now, really, that when we talk about that these criteria could really function as a labeling system. A labeling system that would give green light for safe chemicals that fulfill certain sustainability criteria. And now we just need to find out what more additional instruments we need addition to this labeling to push us towards more safe and sustainable chemicals. And to clarify, some chemicals would already today fulfill these criteria, other ones will never fulfill them. For example, it's unlikely that many monomers would fulfill the criteria since they are very hazardous. However, we need the monomers in many functions. They are essential for many uses for society. So what we see as a labeling system will not exclude them from the market, but we will push the market as a driving force towards inherently safe chemicals. So sorry. So how will this happen? Well, we believe it's important to keep 3 things in mind. Firstly, we need to implement the criteria stepwise, to be timetable, and it need to be very clearly communicated by Commission. If it's fluffy, nothing will happen. Secondly, in order to get there, we need to function how to make a market for safe and sustainable chemicals, how to create market advantages for them. And I think the interesting thing is here really to talk to the so-called front-running companies, the ones that have already done the journey or is about to do the journey to go to this direction. What instruments would help them and would have helped them on the market? And out from a conversation we have had with such companies, it's very clear that they say the markets need a strong demand for these chemicals. The question is, of course, which are the best instruments to set there? But what we can think of is very much that we need to get public procurement to really request safe and sustainable by design chemicals and materials. It should be the best available technology. The future taxonomy should promote such chemicals. And of course, the research funding needs really to be linked to developing to safe and sustainable by design chemicals. Thirdly, of course, it's not enough just to have carrots. Sticks are needed, like grants, restrictions, fees, taxes as before. But really most important, I think, is really to get a well-functioning enforcement that is elected today. So summarizing, what we see is that really that the safe and sustainable design criteria needs to be a driver, could be as a labeling system, a label for safe and sustainable by design chemicals and materials. And as such on its own, it would be a driving force. And in addition, we need to find more mechanisms that can really put the demand on the market to go in this direction. So we see this as the way towards the aim of the chemical strategy, inherently safe chemicals. Thanks. And then actually I take a moment also to promote that we also had a booth actually afterwards. And actually already directly after it will take place the Acronym European Championship between Cristina and Bjorn. I mean, they are the ones that have come up with all these acronyms over the years that are all in our everyday lives. So don't miss this opportunity to really see the battle between the two of them. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne-Sofie. That's already very good advertisement for the rest. But let's still go through this discussion and give Bjorn the final word in this first round. Bjorn, recognizing there's still a lot of uncertainty on the way forward and ECHA's role in the future also in this, can we learn anything from the experience which we've had with implementing REACH and CLP? What can be used in the future? Go ahead.
Thanks, Jacques. Absolutely. I'll try to get back to being serious, especially after seeing Christina's hat and looking forward to this competition a little bit later on. Let me just start off by saying it's obvious everybody is saying innovation. That's the key, which basically means we've got to change the chemicals, we've got to change the chemistry. And the whole issue, like you mapped out, Jacques, is where to go, which we won't talk about here, but we all recognize it's urgent. You said 2022 is our presumption in our discussion. Well, that's also what the Commission industry strategies would say. At least it interprets, I interpret it as such. We got to know where to go, where we want to be in 2050, already in 2022 in order to set the course. And it's all about innovation. And it's about how to steer, how to drive, how to push, how to pull innovation to get us there. And I think if we just start looking at some of the challenges, and then I'll come to, of course, there's a path, when we talk sustainability, we're talking about merging of policy areas. If you just take the one pillar of circular economy, so not even looking at the chemical strategy, but circular economy, we're already there talking about merging chemicals, waste, and product policy. And if you take the whole Green Deal elements involved or linked to chemicals industry, like Marco mentioned, you know, it's even more policy areas. And they all got to merge in order to pull, push, steer, drive this innovation. So it's very much an issue of finding out who is good at what in these various policy areas, and then do what we're good at within that policy area, being now much more aware of what others are doing. And there, look at chemicals legislation, which is, of course, what we in ECHA have a competence in terms of implementing. So it's a much narrower picture than the whole picture, which is needed to drive innovation. Then clearly there, what we see the chemicals legislation is good at is identifying which chemicals we don't want on the market. And in a sustainable context, it's more than safety, but it's those properties that you can see in the chemical itself or the chemistry developing or producing the chemicals that we're good at looking at, and therefore extending that bit of our work in contributing ultimately to sustainability. And what we're also good at is to ensure safety of those substances which remain on the market. So basically, given the huge innovation challenge, looking at it from our competence perspective in ECHA, what we basically see is needed is much more efficient and much more consistent legislation, which basically gives clarity of goal, better clarity of goal, more predictability of outcome, and an ability for everybody who has to take decisions in this sustainability context to decide faster. So, of course, starting with industry, but then ending also with regulators. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Bjorn, and thank you to all for very good introductions. And I think addressing very well already the challenge which we have in this discussion, what kind of tools we have, what kind of ways forward do we see. We've heard legislation, we've heard innovation, we heard research, we heard, let's say, different criteria which could be used. But let me maybe zoom in a bit further and then also challenge you on to go a little bit more in detail. If you think about what regulation can do, in particular in the shorter term, and I think you referred to it, Cristina, is trying to sort of get rid of the top of the iceberg relatively soon, so that we make sure that the most dangerous chemicals are not, let's say, produced and used anymore in Europe. That will probably still leave us with quite a significant number of substances which may be in the end safe if you look at it from a REACH perspective, but actually may not be sustainable in the long term. So how do we move on those? How do we get further with those chemicals? How do we gradually, let's say, achieve a sustainable use and production of chemicals in Europe? Some of you referred to that already, but perhaps some further reflection, ideas, or maybe responses to what other colleagues were saying in the discussion until now. Could I give any of you the floor to react on that? Because we'll still have 3 decades to go, let's be clear. Yes, Cristina.
I can give it a try, Jack.
Right.
So if we have, so indeed, you were mentioning that we will be, I mean, through regulatory means focusing on the tip of the iceberg. Of course, this is only talking about the regulations I was referring that were looking into the phasing out. We have other regulatory means in order to move towards more sustainable products. And that's, for example, the Sustainable Products Initiative, but also other initiatives that we may have on the pipeline that will try to, for example, empower consumers to make a shift, etc. And of course, there is always the ultimate possibility to even look further into strengthening, the polluter pays principle. But I think if you're talking, if now the question is about what happens with chemicals that are safe but are not sustainable. I think sustainability, this is a discussion about sustainability at large, and that, from my point of view, needs a societal change. And I think we are all engaged in this societal change from the different angles. No, maybe we are focusing here on the chemicals, but as Marco was saying, they are also confronted to this from other angles than just the chemicals properties, but also the emissions and further life of the materials, digitalization, and many other challenges that will get us there to this full planetary change, into having sustainability as our norm, as our way of living, and this change that needs to happen. I think we've seen in the chemicals area, we've seen some traces of it where we're talking about substitution. We're talking about substitution, and then we start, and you can label this discussion substitution under authorization. You can label it essential uses. You can label it the way you want. But at the end of the day, it's the same discussion. Are we ready to do without certain things? And this from at all levels. Are we ready to do without certain things? As consumers, are we ready to do without certain things? As industry, you see, I create debate, Jack. Are we ready to do without certain things? And this is what we have seen also. We have seen in very, very practical cases in authorization decisions. And now we are engaging in this much larger debate. No, when we are talking about substitution in under the aegis of the essential uses. No, so I think this is, as I said, a big societal effort, and it's a planetary effort to go into sustainability. But rather, what companies are coming us to ask us about when we're talking about safe and sustainable by design is the opposite. What if my chemical is sustainable but it's not safe? What are you going to do about that? No, especially if the chemical is in this tip of the iceberg. But that was not your question, so we'll not get into that.
That was not the
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Susanne, you want to react to that?
Yeah, I very much liked Cristina referring to, let's say, to the use of the products. And I think as the downstream users, and most of the products where you are hinting to are absolutely there to be used by end users, by consumers. And I think the role of the downstream users is also to help in educating, maybe educating is too prescriptive, but helping in understanding, awareness creating of the use of the products in terms of the safe and sustainable use. So helping them, and I think we at AISE had one very nice example, and promoting the cold washing, because the washing part is the one which causes the highest impact on the life cycle on a product. So definitely we are here. Going back to the criteria of safe and sustainable by design, I think DUCC is absolutely happy to provide input, because what business needs to continue to work is predictability, business certainty of what are the criteria, and also to be able, and Malcolm mentioned it earlier, to have a framework where they can collaborate and operate together without falling under any suspicion of competition law rules. So there shows the call to the Commission of clear ways industry can operate along with other associations or sectors down and up together to help in defining what is safe and sustainable by design in the process, the procedures, the materials, to work together, because only in collaboration we can do this shift. There's really a paradigm shift in the whole chemical legislation. We want to be there, but it needs to be a clear, predictable framework. Otherwise, industry has difficulties to invest. Thank you.
Okay, I come back to predictability and setting intermediate goals, as also Anne-Sofie has been referring to later. But Anne-Sofie, you wanted maybe also to react to my statement and Cristina's reaction to that in terms of tools.
Yes, please. What I really think is that when we look at safer and sustainable, we can't take in all sustainability dimensions from beginning. We have to focus on a few ones in the beginning, because we don't have the data for all kind of information for sustainability. But carbon emission, I think that is where we really have to focus on first, and safety. So these two, and then later on add on more sustainability parameters and make that clear for industry when it will happen, and find a timetable for that. But start with carbon emission and then add on recyclability later on, water use and so on later on. But if we start with everything right now with the parameters, I think we will not find any information, and there won't be any chemicals or materials that will fulfill it. So it will just be stuck. So I think it's important to set a timetable for when we take on more and more sustainability criteria to enable a system that is functioning for industry.
Okay, thanks very much. Other reactions to this discussion? Marco and then Bjorn.
I'm pointing to Bjorn, but I'll leave the last to you, Bjorn. I think we need a whole lot of things, and this is not a Christmas list, but there's, first of all, the sooner we get clarity on safe and sustainable by design, the better. Because from then on, we can start translating into the different value chains. The same applies with the definition on essential use. The same applies with the definition of consumer goods in that sense. What's the consumer use? What's the industrial use? What's the professional use? Because we don't have too many options and too many chances before it's 2050. I'd like to come into that one as well. We're going to have to make investments not only in the decarbonization, but also in new chemistries and innovation that takes time. 5 to 10 years is gone before you know it. Clarity up front as soon as we can, direction for the companies, closing the back door on enforcement, and that was mentioned by Anne-Sofie as well, and then opening up to the innovation pathways, because one, maybe two chances to get it right, and then we're in 2030, and then we're in 2050 already. And that puts a pressure on Cristina and the Commission team, but the more of that clarity at the beginning, and I think there Anne-Sofie gives a direction, not trying to do everything at the beginning, but having a starting point, and then translating it into a transition pathway for the industry. What's really important to add there is what Anne-Sofie said. We still need the monomers, we need the reactiveness, we need the intermediates, and where you see taxonomy, for example, go off track, that it's going to define green as such a small group that de facto you end up with nothing. That's also where, with all due respect, some realism needs to come in, that you have chemistry for reactiveness, which gets you products that you can then use later in a safe and sustainable by design way, where some of the language being used currently is no hazard or everything on day one, which won't work. You need to see this as a transformation process, which I think is very crucial in many of the debates we have right now.
Okay, and that of course clearly, let's say, puts this discussion about intermediate goals on the table, because of course everybody I think recognizes that you cannot stop all chemical production at one point in time, so you have to think longer term. Bjorn, reaction to this as well?
Yes, thank you, Jacques. Just to emphasize a couple of points. I mean, I think we all agree on the urgency, and in essence, it's moving ahead on everything all at one go and getting very quickly to an endpoint, which we all know won't work. The one example that I recall from the past is, the call for full life cycle assessment of every chemical. And if you do that, we'll be collecting data for the next 50 years before we can make any decision. So that's where I think that the most practical way to go forward is to recognize there is a necessity to merge. And this means that people like Marco, Anne-Sofie, and Susanne, they really got a huge challenge because it is in their work that things get merged. But if you are able to take one step back and say which policy area has which competence to contribute to the overall goal, and have those policy areas then concentrate on what they're good at, and then move forward in a coordinated, but in one where we are separating up who does what, so that, in chemicals policy, we don't end up doing product policy, waste policy, plus climate policy, plus, biodiversity policy. At one go, I think that's practical in terms of the work forward. On essentiality, I perfectly agree from what our experience is in ECHA, that, whatever label you want to put on it, what it all boils down to is basically from a societal, so this is a policy decision, from a societal perspective, how much are you willing to pay more? Or how much functionality of your product, your good, are you willing to accept goes down in order to save the planet? That's the effective question. And that's the policy challenge. So here, I'm really happy to sit in ECHA and be able to tell policy what we think the parameters are to make that decision, but you guys have to clearly weigh them. And I think that weighing needs to be done openly to be able to actually get on this path of developing new chemicals in time for 2050. And then I do have a comment on predictability, but Jacques, you said that comes up. And I think it's a huge dilemma for everybody here, is how to get to legal certainty, predictability, but also be accurate. Those are conflicting goals, which also need a clear upfront policy discussion to be able to start implementing fast.
Yeah, thanks, Bjorn. I wanted to turn to that, and also looking at the time, because there's not that much left. Indeed, we have this 2050 goal. We have 3 decades from here. Would it help to set intermediate goals? Assuming, again, we know where we want to go. We know that's what safe and sustainable is. We see that in the area of climate change. Would it help here as well? And should we develop some sort of indicator or scoring systems to guide companies, to guide maybe the consumers in terms of the products which they buy? Would that be possible? Any reaction to that? And that would, of course, lead, if we are clear about where we want to be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And that also reflects what Marco was asking for, I think. But maybe a reaction to that. Would that help in this discussion? Go ahead, Marco.
Yeah, I'll start with a philosophical remark, which I always say. I'd rather have what I want in an unpredictable way than what I not want in a very predictable way.
Makes sense.
Sorry to be a bit philosophical, but why saying that? Industry thrives on change. That's called competition. So I think predictability is a word we might use too much because it gives a certain future, and there is no such thing as a certain future. I think what we need is clear definitions, clear direction. And in that sense, the chemical strategy has set the direction. Now, where we are at, and you see it with climate as well, we know the what, more or less. Where we need to look at is the how. We need to start getting it done. And I'm not sure intermediate targets or more targets make the difference there. What we need is the clarity in the definitions. What we need is the enforcement to be done. What we need is the markets to be developed. And the reason I'm saying that we could lose a lot of time on debates on targets, where we're at is how we're going to do it, how we define the how do we move forward, much more than on a target debate.
But would it help to be more transparent on where you are in terms of where your companies are, where the products are in terms of their, let's say, path towards sustainable use of chemicals and sustainability as a whole for the products?
I think you need information and you might need indicators, but the biggest indicator you need is how much investment is coming into Europe to make the transformation. That is what you want to know. How much money is going to be invested in innovation to make the transformation? How many new markets and products are being developed? And I don't see there a target discussion. I can see a target discussion on recycled content in products, but that's a bit of a different one. If you look at the transformation we need to go through, most of those investments will be made now, will be in place by 2050. So clarity and direction is the huge thing. As soon as possible, translate it into these definitions, more than intermediate targets. But
okay, that's a clear answer. Susanne?
I can only subscribe to what Marco was saying. I think we all agree on where we want on the vision. As I said, DUCC is definitely behind the vision of the Commission on the Green Deal, be it on the chemical strategy for sustainability, be it on the circular economy action plan, the industrial strategy, the digital agenda. But on the how of getting there, I think industry has much more expertise in developing the systems to reach the target. And as Marco was saying, there's a need for clear definitions of the criteria, because I'm afraid that also in the taxonomy discussion, suddenly this sector will move ahead setting their own definitions of what is sustainable and what not. And then the industry will be blocked when they want to go to invest, because the bank is saying, oh, this is not sustainable, so we won't give you the loan and the funds. You need to do the innovation. So there's a catch-22 situation, and as long as the criteria are not clear set, how companies can dare to invest. And I think they have the best expertise on what is practical, feasible, to speed up as well the developments. And really the how is for me something where I think industry has probably better chances to achieve it, to do it in a quicker way, as long as the definition and criteria are clear for everyone.
Okay, could I maybe turn to Cristina then in terms of if there are already any further ideas about how these criteria would be implemented or where they would be implemented, or is that still a discussion which is in very early phases that we can't say too much about it. Could you reflect on that?
The
The criteria itself, how you see them being used, basically. I mean, in regulation, in of course, sustainable, let's say, financing discussions, but maybe in other areas as well.
And for me, what makes sense is that we use them across the board. So as Susanne was saying, that we don't have criteria that apply in one particular area and they don't apply in another. So it's important that we are trying to have a solution that applies through all the phases, no, of the polygon that we're trying to handle here. So, and that is a challenge, and it's a challenge for all of us because we have a number of initiatives that are going at the same time with different timings, and we need to remain alert and try to bring the consistency to the system while we are at different levels of development. So it's impossible to use the safe and sustainable by design criteria in taxonomy if taxonomy is advancing faster than the safe and sustainable by design criteria. What we can do is try to have placeholders that may reference to what in the future may be developed. But indeed, the idea is to use these criteria across the board in the different pieces of legislation, regulatory and non-regulatory. So also for industry to apply it themselves. So they will embrace it and it will be their own way of operating. No, this is the vision of the strategy. So it's not to have a regulation that says you must use the safe and sustainable design criteria, but you are, as industry, interested in doing that. And I think they are, in all fairness. Of all the things in the strategy, one of the things that the industry has been most positive about is this safe and sustainable by design criteria. Why? Because it tries to bring together all the challenges that they are facing in the transformation. And that is something that we need to do also for them. It's still on the development of the criteria themselves. We are at the early stages, and you know that it's the work is done in the Commission by our colleagues in RTD. But I was interested maybe to hear from Marco and Susanne what they think of the idea of Anne-Sofie of focusing on concrete parameters, so evolve the criteria by parameters. So not try to get all in once, but try to evolve in parameters as we try to obtain information. Because that we can also align nicely with development of information for chemicals. And you know that in the strategy, there is this call to start having more information about the environmental footprint. So we can see how we can start putting together the information packages. So little by little, we can move in this path instead of trying to do it in one go. So I would be interested to see what they thought about this idea.
Marco, Susanne, any reaction to that? Then I give you the floor, Bjorn.
Yeah, we go on a different level, to be honest, and let me explain. What we've tried to ask the European Commission, if you look at and this is the multiple impact, the double transition, which I'll translate to safe and sustainable by design. If you see the sectoral climate roadmaps that will be coming under the climate law, if you see the transformation pathways coming under the industrial policy, if you see indeed digital, climate, circular, and CSS all coming to our industry, and you look at the ecosystem approach that Commissioner Breton is promoting, we've been very clear to the Commission saying, if you want an ecosystem where we are right now for energy-intensive industries, it should be built, or a transformation pathway for energy intensives, it should be built on a pathway for the chemical industry. This is so much, and maybe even too much to handle without integrating it in a roadmap for the industry. Now, that's what we are developing, and I would translate that to also the interpretation of criteria on safe and sustainable by design. Because again, this is about investments. We need to make the right investments, sequencing them over time, staying in Europe, as the strategy also says, becoming leading champions. That means you can't do it all at the same time. Now, that analysis we're making, but that also means in translating for criteria in safe and sustainable by design, some measures we can take early, which, for example, is to look at chemistry made where the energy is replaced by climate neutral energy. Feedstocks might remain fossil for a long time to come. Question how to define that in sustainability terms then in safe and sustainable by design. Safety is first, risk-based approach still in place, but you can see also the difference in consumer use versus professional and industrial use in the CSS approach. So I think it has to come two ways. It has to come into a transformation plan for the entire industry, which then also will give you the answers if you can start where I like the idea of Anne-Sofie, start somewhere and not apply everything at the same time, but which ones then to start also apply in what can industry do and where do we have the alternatives already and where actually are we going to need 5 or 10 years of research still to come. So I'm not saying no, I'm saying interesting concept, but also see it wider as the entire structure of the industry changing, and what can we handle and what can we do?
Yeah, okay, that is, I think, very clear that indeed this whole discussion on the chemicals aspect of safe and sustainable has to be seen much broader, and also the other aspects which you're all confronted with need to be taken into account. Susanne, any quick reaction to Christina's question? Otherwise, Bjorn, and then I think we'll need to wrap up relatively soon.
I can only subscribe because as downstream users, we use the chemicals from the suppliers to transform those into mixtures to be used then by end user or the consumer. So definitely we are in between, and therefore for me it's important to have the full value chain dialogue, collaboration, cooperation ongoing. Otherwise we will stuck, and as Marco is saying, there's so many things in parallel, where to start. They're all connected, and I liked in the strategy as well, it was mentioned, get it simplified and streamlined. And industry can't afford working in all the streams in parallel, because it's, of course, at each bit and piece is influencing the other one. And as downstream users, we definitely are happy also to work on the communication with the users and the consumers, and to ensure the longevity of the products, of the right use, of the safe use and the sustainable use. On that part, definitely we have also a role to play. But first we need the chemicals to make the mixture. So the focus...
Absolutely, okay.
Yeah.
That's clear, yes.
I'm going to steal 1 minute. I think the crucial part is, and that's where I will meet Anne-Sofie, is if we have the concept of SSBD, what is safe and sustainable by design, next generation of chemistries for cosmetics, for paints, for aviation? Because you'll get different answers as well. This is where Horizon can come in, or DGRTD with the strategic research agenda mentioned in the CSS, but then apply it to specific value chains, and then it gets practical. And I think then we can give the answers. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Bjorn. You're muted. You're muted.
I love Bjorn muted.
Yeah, I know, Marco.
Cristina agrees.
As my boss on the management board, of course. Two reflections. I mean, one is sustainability, and there I subscribe very much to Anne-Sophie's reflection, because we're not very good yet at knowing what needs to be included in the sustainability angle of the work that we do within chemicals policy. We know the end point in abstraction, but what it really means we need to pull down. But I would just add that it's really, I think it's important to think about it in terms of what are the various policy areas good at, and where can those policy areas regulate better, so that we don't end up trying in the definition of a safe and sustainable chemical to take care of the areas which are better taken care of under product policy, better taken care of by our colleagues in climate change, and focus on those things that we are better at. Again, this doesn't help so much Marco and Susanne and Anne-Sofie, but it does in terms of actually moving forward in a regulatory context that we do that. The other one is to say we've all put in the mouths very strongly and confidently safe and sustainable chemicals. When we have clear definition of safe and sustainable chemicals, this is the path. Now, safe, we all are taking for granted, we actually know, and I do think that we're pretty good at doing that, or I would say we're okay at doing that, but we got to get a lot okayer. And the whole issue there is, if you look at any restriction done today, or you look at almost any compliance substance evaluation done today, there is a huge difference of view between industry and authorities as to what is safe and what is not safe. And I think that's one area we really need to tackle. And if we want clear safety criteria, that means being much more generic than being specific. Now, I purposely avoid the hazard versus risk, because I don't believe that these are two different concepts. I believe they are a continuum of the same thing, and that it's much more constructive to sit down and talk about how generic do you want to go and how specific do you need to be. But I think just to emphasize that a core issue in the chemical strategy is the move towards generic risk management, one substance, one assessment, but also, take those two. And clearly that in itself requires substantial discussion to create the legal certainty and the endpoint that we want to get at under the word safe in safe and sustainable criteria.
Okay, thanks very much. Very good and comments also, but we need to wrap up. So I want to give you all basically 1 minute as a sort of last statement where you can reflect on what you've heard, but absolutely 1 minute, because in 5 minutes we have to stop the whole session. So please, can I just follow the same order as we started? So Cristina, some final words perhaps on what you've heard or what you want to say now?
Well, I really had not thought about it. I was quite intrigued by the whole discussion. You see, this time, Marco, I liked that Bjorn was talking, because I fully agree with what he was saying on getting better at the safe element. I think safe means different things for different people, and that we have seen, as Bjorn was saying, with the restrictions and with the authorizations. But for me, I think final remark. I think we are all. At least in this panel, we are all agreeing on the objective, and I think we all are realizing what the challenge is to get there, and is the how and how we're getting there. That is the path that we need to walk. I'm happy to see that industry, NGOs, and administration, we are all on the same. We are attuned in our willingness to get there, and we'll need your help. So thank you very much for the willingness, and for the buy-in into all the objectives that the Commission has set under the Green Deal.
Quickly. You're still thinking.
You want me, Jack, or?
I'm on you, sorry. I said Marco, go ahead.
Okay, I didn't hear the Marco. So very quickly. First of all, Cefic views on safe and sustainable by design, as I said, go to the online stand. You'll learn more. Secondly, to be continued. Thirdly, and that's from the cooperation with ECHA. Thanks to you, Jack and Bjorn, for raising this. But still the desire to see that we use the ECHA knowledge on this, because I think this is all theoretical. It's great. But when it gets practical, it gets complicated. We have the biggest database on the planet sitting in Helsinki, and we have a lot of knowledge from what we've currently done. So there, I think if we bring the reality of and the experience of Helsinki plus the industry into the safe and sustainable by design debate, as I said, practical, what does it mean for a next generation of chemistries in a specific value chain, then I think we can move forward.
Thanks, that will certainly resonate in this house for sure. Susanne.
Thank you. So DUCC is absolutely committed to play its role for the next 20 years in the collaboration, and I think it was mentioned several times. We are committed to manufacture safe and sustainable chemicals mixtures. We want to remain a key actor in the chemical value chain and looking forward to continue to be so. We also look forward to definitely participate in the discussion on the generic risk assessments, and then on the one assessment, one substance, one assessment. We believe that, and Marco mentioned it, so you have one substance, one assessment, but then you need probably, or definitely also considerations to the users in the different sectors about is it then how to apply it best in practical terms to a mixture or an article. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anne-Sofie?
Yes, I think it's very interesting. I think for us, it's really that this safe and sustainable by design criteria can really function as a driver, possibly as a labeling system, but not for consuming first, and instead for the ones that are producing all the products for consumers. So such a system, I'm very happy to hear there's an interest to look at taking on some parameters first, like safety and climate, and then add on more climate, and then on more parameters. I think it's very interesting that there's interest from the other ones to make such a system. And I think this is the only way to get it, so it works to achieve the aims you want to achieve and to make it workable for industry.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Bjorn, you want to say last words? You had already quite good summary, I think, in the end, but go ahead.
I'll just throw in one last, I mean, I agree what I'm hearing here, so I'm not going to repeat that. Just saying we're all in one boat. This is a 30-year project, and I think that's more than important to recognize upfront that we're talking 30 years, a little bit less than I've been working for the institutions. That's a long time. And finally, that the only way that we can do this, I mean, the challenge is bigger than it was 30 years ago. It's a huge challenge. And I think it's only by being honest and being self-critical that we're going to be able to do this together. I know that's much easier for ECHA. We're scientific, and thereby honesty is sort of labeled as scientific. Then maybe it is for you with your agendas that you must follow. So it's full of respect. But I think that's an absolutely essential key to be able to move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your contributions. I think we've had a very good and interesting debate. A lot of indeed points which I think probably in the end we do actually agree where we want to go. Quite some discussion needed, but I think it was a very good start we had today. And of course, we are more than happy to contribute and further be involved in that discussion. But yeah, the lead is, of course, clearly in Brussels, as we discussed at the start of this meeting. So thanks again. Next, we will have a 30 minutes networking break. During the break, we encourage you all, audience, please, to join the live interaction at the virtual expo. Please give it a visit and meet the experts there. I mean, some of you have already referred to that. They are there for you. During the break, you can also make new contacts by joining the virtual coffee room or meet other participants in speed networking, and please try it out. After the break at 12 o'clock Helsinki time, we continue with a number of interactive sessions on regulatory expectations and how we help you to meet them. And we also continue with the sustainability topic by looking at a few interesting case studies. How did these companies actually manage to proactively improve their sustainability without compromising on the performance of their chemicals? So thanks again, enjoy the sessions, and see you all there. Bye-bye.